Hey, welcome back to the program. It's Frank. Great to have you back with me. It's the 30th of September. Hope you had a great weekend. I did. Sunshine's back in the Northeast after several days of rain and clouds. I'm not just an economist. I also teach economics. Started teaching at Elon University years ago as an adjunct professor. Teaching is a wonderful job. Inside the classroom, phenomenal. The impacts you can have on young people really, really is a great feeling. That's the reward of teaching in the classroom. And over the weekend, I got to see a bunch of young, familiar faces from the classroom, and it was just fantastic. I couldn't have been more proud of these young people and the success they're having so early in life. And I was lucky enough to have been one of their teachers. And it was a wonderfully proud feeling to see how they've turned out. Got to see James and Annie and Jonathan and Ross and Daniel and Paul and Cam and Justin and Tommy and Santi, Jacob, Jessica. Really great to see them all. Really impressive. Thank you for letting me be your teacher. And their futures look bright. Okay, moving on from that. Helene struck late last week, over the weekend. The wind wasn't too bad, but the water was quite severe. The rain was pretty severe in a short period of time. And it looks like, rather than the coastline, but the interstates, Georgia, North Carolina, really took a big hit, especially Western North Carolina. The rivers flooded, water went over dams, wiped out whole communities, dozens and maybe hundreds of people still missing, dozens dead. Important rail and road networks have been destroyed. Important mining operations have potentially been disrupted when it comes to the chip world, the computer chip world. And over the weekend, President Biden was on the beach in Delaware and Kamala Harris was campaigning in California, hobnobbing with the rich and famous. Today, they're trying to react quickly as if they're engaged. Donald Trump is well ahead of them, already in the region, comforting fellow Americans who've been hurt by this hurricane and the rains that came with it. President Biden said today on a tarmac, when asked about Americans suffering the flood disaster zone, will there be more aid for them? He says, no, there won't be any more resources coming. We've given them all we have. If you look at the swath of flood damage, a lot of red counties, a lot of red states, people are interpreting that as something nefarious. Here we are giving billions of dollars to Ukraine on a moment's notice, billions of dollars allocated for the support of illegal immigrants that allows them to live above America's poverty line. And somehow we don't have any more aid for the Americans who are suffering through this hurricane, the loss of their homes, the loss of roads, loss of bridges, loss of electricity, loss of potable water. Not good. Kamala Harris released a photo today of herself on Air Force Two, apparently engaged in some way in the picture, concerned about the results of the hurricane and the flooding. But a little black eye for President Biden and Kamala Harris in terms of the reaction to this, their readiness for this, and ignoring it over the weekend. So let's hope for the best for those folks down in the South. Of course, they will rebuild, but it's going to take a while. And we have some real disruptions that are going to occur as a result of this damage to roads and bridges and highways and railroads. That will definitely impact the supply chain and movement of goods and services in the region, which ties us into this next story, which is the port strike, potentially in the Northeast here. It's a looming strike that could begin at midnight tonight. 14 Gulf and East Coast ports can begin striking at 12:01. About $5 billion in daily international trade coming into the Gulf and East Coast ports. Think China. All our retail stuff comes from China. And so we have some real risks here if this union doesn't get what they want. And they're asking for a lot. They're asking for like an 80% increase in pay over a 6-year period of time. My goodness, the power of unions. You want more unions? Supply chains are at risk here. If they don't get what they want, President Biden said there won't be a strike. He's in talks with both sides. Again, he was on the beach though all weekend. And so this could really impact the presidential election, really impact the economy, really impact not so much necessities, but daily things we buy that come to us by big box stores via China. It's the International Longshoremen Association and the U.S. Maritime Alliance contract set to expire today at midnight. So it's likely to result in higher reliance on West Coast ports for Asia-sourced products, rerouting other plans ahead of potential disruption to ensure critical product arrives on time at holidays. Remember, Christmas is only a little less than 2.5 months. So U.S. retailers could really be impacted, and therefore consumers. We had an interesting conversation this morning on CNBC Squawk Box with Commerce Secretary Gina Raimondo and Becky Quick. Remember, Gina Raimondo was the one who said a few weeks ago that she didn't know about the Bureau of Labor Statistics. She didn't know what they were or the data they provided. It's in her department. This is what she has to say today to Becky Quick about the strike.
Where have you been kind of focused and hearing on what would happen if the strike goes, let's say, longer than a week?
Again, I have not been very focused on that.
What is she focused on? What's her job? This is commerce. Transportation could be involved as well, Pete Buttigieg, but this is commerce, and she's telling us she's not focused on that. This is a serious implication for the U.S. economy. Union wants more, and if union gets more, you know what's going to happen to prices for those products that come from those ports? Higher. Inflationary. The hurricane, inflationary. With that in mind, we go to Jerome Powell, who was speaking today. He was in Nashville, Tennessee. He was talking about monetary policy looking forward. And he says, looking forward, if the economy evolves broadly as expected, policy will move over time toward a more neutral stance. But we are not on any preset course. The risks are two-sided, and we'll continue to make our decisions meeting by meeting. He went too much too soon. He knows it. He goes on to say, when asked about time, he said, this is not a committee, referring to the FOMC committee, that feels like it's in a hurry to cut rates quickly. Although he said 2 weeks ago in his press conference that they're ready to cut rates more this year. He only has 2 more meetings, November and December. He characterized the labor market as solid, though clearly cooled over last year. He goes on to say the decision reflects our growing confidence that with an appropriate recalibration of our policy stance, strength in the labor market can be maintained in an environment of moderate economic growth and inflation moving sustainably down to our objective. Maybe, but inflation's not over. He says we don't need to see further cooling in the labor market conditions to achieve 2% inflation. Remember that in the short run, empirically, we can see a trade-off between inflation and unemployment. In the long run, we don't see that relationship as clearly. So Powell's setting up for maybe more rate cuts, but he's definitely pulled back from what he said in his meeting 2 weeks ago, which he said deliberately there'll be more rate cuts this year. And now he's equivocating a little bit. Turning our attention to Kamala Harris, the VP. Oh, by the way, who's running the country? Because Joe Biden doesn't seem to be. He's been doing a few public appearances here the past couple of days, and he was at the UN last week. The verbal gaffes just don't stop. And he seems to be on vacation most of the time. And Kamala's running full-time for presidency. Who's running the country? All right, so Kamala Harris, again, avoiding the mainstream media, avoiding interviews, avoiding press conferences. Of course, did go on to a softball podcast, All the Smoke, with a bunch of puffball questions by her friends who want to make her look good. And she was asked a really simple question. Let's take a listen.
Explain how a bill becomes a law.
Okay. I believe that the best way the system works is when the power is with the people to then advocate for their needs and have their needs met. So that's the big macro stepping back, right? One of the ways that the system works to do that the system should work to do that, is we have elected representation who represent the people in these state legislatures, which is where laws get passed, or in Congress, which is where the federal laws get passed. And for the system to work the right way, legislators, these members of the state legislature, let's say your state senator, your state assembly member, or your congressman or your United States senator, will meet with, and they'll have ways of receiving information from the people about what they want. I think it's really important always that we know our power to organize around what we need. And sometimes that'll take the form of writing letters. Sometimes it'll take the form of mass protests to make sure the voice of the people is heard by their representative leaders, who then have as their responsibility to write up some legislation that meets the needs of the people. And then when they write that up, they take a vote in their body, if it's a state house or Congress. And if the majority of the people there agree with it, it becomes a law. So that's how it's supposed to work. And I mean, it does connect to what we were talking about earlier, which is then reminding folks they have a right to expect that their leaders will hear them and take seriously their need.
Well, on that point, our leaders are not hearing us because America has been saying we don't want open borders for decades, and we've been saying it for 3.5 years. So that doesn't really stand up. But that really isn't how it works. She didn't mention the executive branch. She didn't mention the other body. Both legislative bodies have to pass it with a majority, but then it has to go to the executive branch, to a governor or the president for final approval. It's the executive branch approval that finally turns a bill into law, not a simple majority in one house of a legislative chamber. Remember, she was a U.S. senator. She was a DA. This is something she should probably know. Anyway, not the best description on how a law is passed. Speaking of laws, Gavin Newsom, governor of California, had 40 bills remaining to be signed or not signed on his desk that came to him as the California legislature adjourned on August 31st. Two things that came out for me. He vetoed an artificial intelligence legislation. No surprise there. The powerful people in Northern California and Silicon Valley were not going to allow that to happen. And they were able to twist his arm sufficiently, but AI needs to be regulated for sure. AI is going to be a problem. It was a whole high-profile bill that would have regulated AI technology by requiring companies to test their AI models for societal harm. And Newsom said that he vetoed it because it risks curtailing the very innovation that fuels advancement in favor of the public good. This idea that tech is always positive, that tech can never be slowed down, that advancement, innovation can never be slowed down, is wrong. Regulating artificial intelligence is not going to slow down artificial intelligence. And by the way, if you're concerned about global warming, you cannot be a supporter of artificial intelligence. The amount of energy they need to run these servers, to run these machines that kick out this information, AI, is unprecedented. In fact, AI companies are trying to get licenses around the country for their own power plants, small nuclear plants, electrical plants, green energy plants, because they consume so much energy. And then the bill he did sign was to stop the use of voter ID. The measure bans local governments from requiring voters to present identification to vote. Just stunning. This is part of the Democrat plan to allow non-citizens, illegal immigrants, to vote in local, state, and federal elections. And we just can't have that. That's not how a constitutional republic runs. That's not how a society runs. But nonetheless, that's what we see here. And speaking of illegal immigrants, over the weekend, on Friday, Kamala Harris, for the first time in 3.5 years, actually visited the southern border. She was there for about 20 minutes for a photo op. This was on the same day that data was released that some 13,000 murderers have been allowed into the country across the southern border and 425,000 convicted criminals. And they've all been released into the interior. So she went down there for a photo op, talked about how important it was to secure the border. And the Border Patrol wasn't happy. The Border Patrol Union wasn't happy with this. And the Border Patrol sent out a bunch of posts on X challenging VP Harris. Fact check on Harris' speech in Douglas, Arizona. Today, VP Harris claimed that she played a role in increasing Border Patrol agent overtime pay. This couldn't be further from the truth. As with all things border related, she was nowhere to be found when we needed her. Another post. VP Harris asserted in Arizona that CBP needed more resources. We have apprehended over 8 million illegal immigrants over the past 4 years, and now you realize we need more help 38 days before an election? says the Border Patrol Union, NBPC. And they went on, Vice President Harris has ignored the border problem she created for over 3 years. She goes down there for 20 minutes for a photo op and decides to repeat some of the things that the NBPC has said before. But again, where has she been the last 3.5 years? What else? As we get closer to the election, polls are beginning to show Trump taking an increasing lead in the swing states, that there might be momentum behind Trump, Hispanic votes turning to Trump, black men turning to Trump, and that the likelihood of him winning the election by a large enough margin to guarantee it is increasing, and Democrats are getting increasingly nervous. I mentioned last week, one piece of evidence is that President Joe Biden has ordered the Pentagon to use all the Ukrainian funds it has available to support Ukraine before January, in case President Trump wins. And then we had this very unusual video from Jamie Raskin, House member, in the 14th Amendment, Section 3 of the 14th Amendment, which the U.S. Supreme Court has already ruled on. And Section 3 says those who have already held a public office from holding any office if they participate in insurrection or rebellion against the United States, and therefore they'd be disqualified. Now, the Supreme Court has already ruled on this and said that that does not apply here. But Jamie Raskin had this to say. Listen to this. Again, demonstrating nervousness about a Trump win.
What can be put into the Constitution can slip away from you very quickly. And the greatest example going on right now before our very eyes is Section 3 of the 14th Amendment, which they're just disappearing with a magic wand, as if it doesn't exist, even though it could not be clearer what it's stating. And so, they want to kick it to Congress. So it's going to be up to us on January 6th, 2025, to tell the rampaging Trump mobs that he's disqualified. And then we need bodyguards for everybody in civil war conditions, all because the 9 justices, not all of them, but these justices who have not many cases to look at every year, not that much work to do, a huge staff, great protection, simply do not want to do their job and interpret what the great 14th Amendment means.
Pretty serious stuff there. So already predicting, remember, anything they can do to stop Trump, they say he will not be allowed to take office. This is on the back of Fran Lebowitz speaking on the Bill Maher show last week, saying that President Biden should dissolve the Supreme Court. She says it's so disgraceful, this court, that it shouldn't even be allowed to be called the Supreme Court. It isn't. It's an insult to Motown to call it the Supreme Court. It's not even a court, basically. It's a harem. It's Trump's harem. Remember, they don't want to disband the Supreme Court when they want to pack the Supreme Court. Look, this is why elections matter. Timing matters, no question. I'd be on board of term limits for Supreme Court for sure. I'd be on board that. Then lastly, let's just comment on Israel. You got to give Israel credit. The Israeli military, the Mossad, they blew up the pagers of Hezbollah, blew up walkie-talkies. They've taken out the leaders. Pretty much every leader at the top of the Hezbollah flowchart has been killed. Israel's now ready to invade Lebanon on the ground. Israel has said, to hell with this. Gloves are off. You don't want to help us? You want to support us? We'll do it ourselves. Remember now, President Biden and Kamala Harris have been hemming and hawing about Israel since October 7th. Remember President Biden's unbelievably stupid effort to build the floating dock off the coast of Israel, off the coast of Gaza, to get aid into the Gaza Strip? Several $100 million wasted. Plan never worked. Nothing got on shore. Soldiers were hurt. What a waste of time and money. Israel has taken the gloves off. And here's what the analysis is. The analysis is Iran's afraid. So Israel's decided, let's take out the proxies. Let's take out Hamas. Let's take out Hezbollah. Let's take out the Houthi rebels in Yemen. And let's expose Iran. So Iran's been using these proxies organizations to attack Israel for years and years and years. Israel decided, okay, we're going to take out your proxies. And then it's going to be just you and us, Iran. And it's seemingly abundantly clear that Iran is petrified of actually engaging Israel one-on-one, because they know if they do, they don't only get Israel coming back at them, they get the United States coming back at them as well, taking out their nuclear capabilities, setting the country back many, many years. And so this is interesting calculation by the Israelis and very aggressive, very impressive from a military perspective. The gloves are off. Israel doesn't care anymore. That's it. Let's do this thing once and for all. Of course, ceasefire and peace proposals have been suggested right away. President Biden, the same thing. But for now, Israel's on its own, and it's going to do what it has to do to protect the nation. All right, that's all I have for you today. Always try to buy American.